One of my favorite poets is Jalaluddin Rumi. Jalaluddin Rumi, and he said that your task is not to seek love, but merely to seek, and then to find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. And we do sometimes, don't we? Unconsciously, we build blocks to love. And of course, a miracle says that love removes the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, and that's our natural inheritance. There's lots of other things about love everywhere we look. You know, love's a hot topic, really. And I think we do find some barriers sometimes. But love is really a healing process. And I'm going to be talking today about what love is and maybe about what love isn't. Charles Fillmore, I'm sure we've all heard of Charles Fillmore, founder of Unity, he said that love is an inner quality that seeks good everywhere and in everybody. It insists that all is good, and by refusing to see anything but good, it causes that quality finally to appear uppermost in itself and in all things. We like to see the best in people. We like to really not focus on anything that is unlike love. We see the love. I go to a small Science of Mind center in Waynesville, North Carolina, called the Creative Thought Center. It's a fairly small center, and Creative Thought, of course, as you know, Science of Mind, as you know, is founded by Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes said love is within us. It cannot be destroyed. It cannot be ignored. Denying love is our only problem, and embracing it is the only answer. Love heals, love forgives, love makes whole. And of course, we're all familiar maybe with the chapter in 1 Corinthians, chapter 13, that tells us that love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, love does not boast, it's not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It's not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrongdoings. We keep records of wrongdoings, don't we? I mean, they come in handy sometimes, but we're trying to move beyond that. So I loved what kids say. Kids are so honest, and they say some of the funniest things, but they're just being honest. There was a group of children. How many remember Art Linkletter of years and years ago? Yeah, kids say the darndest things. Well, there was a group of children more recent than that, and they were asked their opinion about love. A little boy named David, he was 8 years old, and he said, "Love will find you even if you're trying to hide from it. I've been trying to hide from it since I was 5, but the girls keep finding me anyway." Regina, age 10, she said, "I'm not rushing into being in love. I'm finding 4th grade hard enough." And then some of them were asked for a title of a love song that they might sing to their beloved. Arnold, age 8, his title is this: "How do I love thee when you're always picking your nose?" And then Will, age 7, his title is, "Hey baby, I don't like girls, but I'm willing to forget you are one." And then little Eddie, he's only 6 years old. He said his title is, "I love hamburgers. I like you." I don't know if you can fit that into a song, but we could try it sometime. So my teen years were in the early 60s, and that's the 1960s, not the 1860s. How many really? You might wonder, how many of you remember the 60s? They say if you remember it, you weren't even there. But you know, this was the era of free love. After all, the moon was in the 7th house and Jupiter was aligned with Mars, right? And so we were all asking those deep questions, like who wrote the book of love? Like what's love got to do with it? And then the ultimate question, will you still love me tomorrow? I mean, love was in the air. And we knew that love was a many-splendored thing. Now, there were some skeptics, and they called it puppy love. But we were going around like the wanderer. We were searching for a dream lover. We were just lost in love. And then if they found someone they loved and then they lost them, they would say, I'll never love this way again. We would all be saying, I want somebody to love me and love me tender. And if they didn't get that, they would get on the freeway to love or the soul train, whichever is your favorite mode of transportation, and they'd be yelling, stupid Cupid. And some of them felt like they were victims, and they would be singing, he done me wrong. Now, if you're a young person out there under a certain age, you have no clue what I'm talking about, do you? My daughter, I probably shouldn't embarrass her by pointing. I won't point to you, okay. My daughter wouldn't even know any of these songs, but you might recognize that I just named about 19 or 20 songs we used to snap our fingers to, we used to sing along with, we used to dance to. How many of you remember rushing home from school and turning on Dick Clark and American Bandstand? How many pretended in your living room when no one was watching that you were one of them? I did. I made my dad dance with me. How about Casey Kasem in the top 40 countdown? Yeah. So you do remember the 60s, all right. That's good. So, I think there's a big difference between love and love. You can hear the difference, right? Say that with me. Say love. Say love. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Those songs were about love. But is that really what love is? I mean, is love really just a secondhand emotion? I don't think so. I don't think so. But we thought it was about love. But love really is unconditional, real love. And in fact, quantum physics tells us that love is a frequency. Love is a vibration, the highest vibration there is. And that everything and everyone is made of that frequency. That's what love really is. It's not about Dick Clark and American Bandstand. In fact, some people would equate the word love and God and life as synonymous. Those really refer to the same thing. Love has no requirements. That's what, if you say to someone, I love you, but if you cheat on me, I'll never love you again, then that's not really love. That's condition. If you say, I love you, but once we're married, I'm going to work on changing you so you can meet my expectations. And if you don't, it's hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more. Ooh. But love is unconditional. Now, that doesn't mean that if someone is abusive or is cheating on you, that doesn't mean that you stay with them. No, you have to love yourself first. I think loving ourselves is a prerequisite. We can't really know what love is unless it's already in here for ourselves. And so it's important, if you are in a situation like that, to remove yourself from that situation. You can still love that person from afar. You can allow them to walk their path, even if it looks like a very negative path. If that's where they are, they need to be there for some reason. But we can remove ourselves from, just kind of love them as a third cousin twice removed. Something like that. So Marianne Williamson wrote a book called Enchanted Love, The Mystical Power of Relationships. Anyone read that? 2 people. The rest of you should read that. I haven't read it, actually. But what she says in there is that love, when you first fall in love, you're just in this euphoria. Everything about that person is perfect. And then, a few weeks, a few months, a few minutes later, you start maybe finding some things about them that are a little annoying. You start nitpicking. Like he makes those gross sounds in public. Things like that, or the things that we kind of judge in other people. Or he's maybe thinking, she's so moody and she nags and she's never in the mood. Anyway, we just start seeing all these things about the other person that we don't like. A lot of people feel like that first part of love where everything is beautiful, that's delusional, and then real life sets in. But Marianne would say that it's the opposite. That's the real thing, when we can just see all of their beauty, all of their wonder, and not judge anything about them. That's the reality. That's the reality. But she says that we are not capable so far of being able to hold on to that unconditional love any longer than a few weeks or months or maybe years. So I just really love knowing that we are moving into times when we're able to hold the vision of perfection in each other longer. And we'll get there one day when we really see all of us as perfect and beautiful. So there's a story about a woman. All right, it's a joke. It's not a real story. It's a story about a woman who's 50 years old, and she has a heart attack. She's rushed to the hospital, and she's on the operating table in intensive care, whatever. Anyway, she has a near-death experience. She gets up to the pearly gates, and of course, there is God. And she says, "Oh, God, is this it for me? Am I finished?" God says, "No, you've got another 43 years, 8 months and 2 days to live." So she's kind of relieved. She comes back into her body, and they keep her in the hospital for a few days. She figures, well, while I'm in here, I think I'm going to have a little work done. If I'm going to live that long, I might as well look good. So while she's there, she has a tummy tuck and a breast implant, and she has someone whiten her teeth, and even has someone come in and change her hairstyle and hair color. I mean, she's looking good. So the day comes when she's released from the hospital. She walks out the door to cross over to where the car is waiting. An ambulance rushes by and hits her and kills her. She gets up to those pearly gates again. She says, "God, you told me I had another 43 years, 8 months, and 2 days to live. Why didn't you pull me out from the front of that ambulance?" And God looked at her, and he said, "Oh, hey, I didn't recognize you." So we all want to make a good impression on people, don't we? We want to look good. I have no idea where I am in these notes. Right, we want to make a good impression on each other. We might not go to those extremes or anything. And you've all heard that thing that went around on the internet a while back, I'm sure, about people come into your life either for a season or for a reason or for a lifetime, you know. And we have people that are in our life, and we don't know why they're there. I know the divorce rate is very high right now, and that can be sad, but I have a different perspective of that. I just feel like we have all come into life at this time. This is my perspective. You may not agree. But we've come into this lifetime, for some of us, in order to bring closure to some of our relationships that we've had in perhaps past lifetimes. And that maybe we aren't necessarily intended to stay together forever and ever. Sometimes the best thing we can do is give them not our presence, but our absence to the partner. And so there's a lot of people who are finding themselves in that situation, which I was in that situation 46 years ago as well. But and so that's kind of a reason you come together, to be with that person, to have closure in that situation, or to learn from each other, or to have 3 beautiful children with each other, whatever it is. And then other people come in just for a season. Maybe there's someone that comes into your life and teaches you something new. Like maybe you start bungee jumping. Maybe not, maybe not. But you might be the first time you ever went camping, or the first time you went dancing, or whatever. You learn something new. But sometimes they're only in your life for a season. And then there's those people that are in your life for a lifetime. And that's a real blessing. It's a blessing not only for them, but for all of those who observe that kind of love. So I really honor those people. I can't say that I know a lot of them, because a lot of people, they may stay together, but maybe they go back to that nitpicking, not seeing the beauty in each other. So I want to share a couple stories today that have really impacted me about what I think love is, how love shows up. And I think this first story, you probably have heard it before. It's about a little girl whose name was Johanna. And Johanna was a sickly little girl. She came from a very poor family. Her parents came here from Ireland. It was during the, I think, 1840 potato famine in Ireland that they came to this country. They settled near Boston, Massachusetts, and they had already lost 2 children as infants. And so they had, Hannah was her real name. Her little brother, Jimmy, couldn't say Hannah, so he called her Annie. And she was a very frail child. When she was 5, she had a very rare disease that left her even more fragile. When she was 8, her mother died of tuberculosis, and her little brother Jimmy had tuberculosis as well. And then her mother, as I said, died at age 8. Her father sort of tried to raise the 2 children, but he was an abusive alcoholic, so he left them. And the children had nowhere to go. So they were placed in an almshouse, also known as a poorhouse. And that institution also served as an insane asylum in those days. So Annie was taken into the almshouse, and it was a very dirty place. It was understaffed. It was really not a very healing place to be. Shortly after being in there, her brother Jimmy died. So Annie is totally alone in her whole life. And she was a very wild child. She was very angry, and they couldn't control her. Some of the nurses even said that she was hopelessly insane. And so what they did is they took her into the basement and put her in a cage. And she lived there for, I'm not sure how long. It could have been months, maybe years. But there was an elderly nurse upstairs who really believed that if that little girl was shown love, that she could come around, that she could be a normal child, have a normal life. And so that nurse went down with her every day and sat outside Annie's cage and talked to her lovingly, and eventually would even take a plate of cookies and put there by the cage. Annie paid no attention. She just kind of hissed at her or turned her back and stayed away. But eventually the cookies were gone, and she was coming around and starting to trust that nurse. And eventually, over time, because of the love that nurse shared with her, Annie was able to come out of the cage, come upstairs, and she actually lived her life until she was an adult, probably 18, before she was released from the almshouse. She managed to educate herself, and because she had a disease at 5 years old that impacted her eyesight, she also was very wild and angry. She understood when she came across another little girl who was like that. And she spent the rest of her life really helping that other little girl, Helen Keller. And we never would have heard of Helen Keller if it hadn't been for that nurse that gave that little girl, Annie Sullivan, the love that really changed the world, you could say. Have you all heard that story before? Good. All right. Let me see where I am here. Okay. One of my favorite passages that has to do with love comes from a book called Conversations with God, Book 1, by Neil Donald Walsh. And it says this. It says, at a critical juncture in all human relationships, there is only one question. What would love do now? No other question is relevant. No other question is meaningful. No other question has any importance to your soul. What would love do now? You know, it's easy for us to love people in our family. It's easy for us to love our friends and people who are basically like-minded. But what would love do when we are faced with people who are angry, hateful, abusive? It's a little harder to love at that point if they're violent. Now, there's a story that I heard a few years back. I happened to be in somewhere in Southern California. It was the very first event held by AGNT, the Association for Global New Thought. And I went to their big event, and then we had breakout groups. And the one I was in was with John Robbins. You know, John Robbins died for a new America. And John told us this story. It's a true story about someone he knew. And I realized years later, I did a five-day retreat with this young man. His name is Robbie. And Robbie is a spiritual teacher. He is a musician. And at that time, he was living in Southern California. He decided to take his wife, Judith, and their little 2.5-year-old child on a camping trip. So he rented a camper van, the kind that you drive from inside. Excuse me. And they got in there and they took their trip into Mexico, did lots of sightseeing. So it's the last night before they come back home, come back into our country. They find themselves on a beautiful deserted beach in Baja California. You know where that is? That's that peninsula. It's part of Mexico, but it's Baja California. Beautiful white sand, beautiful, nothing but ocean. There's a strip of forest behind them. Nothing there. So they decide to spend their very last night camped right there. They made a little campfire. He got his guitar out. They loved to sing as a family, sing their camp songs. And they were there for a while, and then they got in the camper van and went to sleep. It was around 1 in the morning when Judith senses something. She hears something. She shakes Robbie. He's sound asleep. She says, "Robbie, I hear something." And of course, he's totally asleep, and all of a sudden, there's a pounding on all 4 sides of their camper van. So Robbie is awake then. He jumps down. He jumps into the driver's seat and tries to start the engine so they can take off. It won't start. Don't you hate it when that happens? It will not start. And before he can try it again, there's a butt of a rifle that breaks the window, comes up against his neck, and a man says, "Money, money." Now, Robbie isn't afraid yet. He's not in fear, but he's really has the adrenaline running. So he reaches down, gets his wallet, hands it to the man, hoping the man will take it and leave. But instead, the man takes it, opens the camper door, shoves Robbie down onto the floor, and rushes in with his 3 other partners, all bandits. One of them has a rusty carving knife. One has a machete. Now Robbie's kind of scared. He's got a wife. He's got a child. And so they start terrorizing this lovely young family and taking things and trashing the place. Now, Robbie tries to remain calm as best he can, and he starts to pray. And in his mind, what he hears is, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies." This is the 23rd Psalm. And he thinks, I don't need to hear that. Why? That's not comforting me much. But that's what he hears. And they continue, these people continue trashing the place. And he realizes these are teenagers. They're coming from a place of fear, not power. And they're not even getting what they're trying to get. So because he's a spiritual teacher, he's always taught that we should treat all human beings respectfully. And he's thinking to himself, well, if I really am going to treat these as human beings, what would I do? I guess I would help them accomplish what their goal is. So he starts pointing things out in there. He says, "There's a brand new cassette tape in that compartment. You might like that." Yes, back in cassette days. "There's a wonderful camera over there. You might like that." They take the camera. He's pointing out everything that they might like. Of course, hoping that they'll take it and leave. But he's refusing to be a victim in this situation. He's centered in his heart as best as he can be, and he's trying to help them so that they will have what they need and go. But they eventually, there's nothing more to give them. He even gave them his guitar, and it's laying there. And then he's hearing it again, "Prepare us a table before me." He realized food brings people together, right? He only had sprouts and tofu in their camp fridge. These didn't look like guys that would be into that. But he remembers there's an apple somewhere, so he gets the apple out, and they take it and start sharing that. Finally, there's just nothing more to give. And the one of the men who still speaks a little English jumps into the driver's seat and says, "Come, we go now." And the other 3 jump in the front with him, and they take off into the night. Robbie and Judith and their child are in the back, and they know they're being taken to where they will be murdered, most likely. And so they're driving recklessly through this forest. The man knows how to maneuver through the forest, driving very fast, and on into the night. It's a very dark of night. Finally, they come to a screeching stop. And in the moonlight, you can see a little shack in the distance there. 3 of the young bandits jump out, disappear into the night. The one in the driver's seat jumps out of the van, comes around and opens the door and says to Robbie, "I'm sorry, we didn't know it was you. We hope we haven't ruined your vacation." And then he reaches in his pocket and takes out Robbie's wallet, gives him back his driver's license and his credit card and says, here, you'll need these at the border. We can't use these. And then he finally says, you have a beautiful family. Go with God. And he disappears. Oh, I forgot to say what he originally said is, in that shack, we have nieces and nephews, cousins. We have no other way to feed them. Now, I don't know if you can think of what that would feel like. So they disappear into the night. Robbie gets in the driver's side, and they drive away. They drive in silence for about 10 minutes, and then they pull over and hold each other and just sob. They're in shock. And I've asked myself over the years, if I were in any kind of a situation like that, would I be able to not go into the victimhood, not go into the revenge or, judging what terrible people these are? Would I understand that maybe they're in a place in their life they had no other choice? It's not for me to judge. And I don't know if I could do that, but what I do know is that if it's possible for one person, it's possible for all of us. And I think we are coming into times on this planet when we are learning to not be victims. We're learning to stand in our truth, even in situations that are very scary. I think it's time that we learn that we are all one. And there are portions of the all one, the all that is, that are desperate in these times. There's a lot of fear. We're living in some really interesting times, and I know it can be scary. We can see what's going on all over the planet. Anyone that's unfortunate enough to still be listening to the news, and I hope that doesn't include any of you, but if we listen to the news, sure, we can get into that, can't we? We can go along with the fear, the anger, the worry, all of the emotions that come up. But our emotions have an energy, they have a frequency. And when we do that, when we focus on all the bad stuff going on in the world, we're participating in it. We're adding our energy, our frequency to those things. And it's time that we move away from that. We are moving into a higher level of consciousness right now. For me, I call it the ascension process because I study ascension masters. I have for quite a few years, and they tell us that we are moving into a raised frequency. The earth itself is raising its frequency, and we're all doing the same, whether we know it or not, whether it feels like it. We can still see the darkness, but there's the light there, and that's where we need to focus. We need to focus on that light. So how do we do that? Well, for one thing, we remain in joy. Find joy. Whatever gives you joy. Coming to a place like this where we're uplifted, where we're inspired, hearing beautiful music like that uplifts us. It might be playing with your grandchildren. It might be being in nature. That's a major thing for many of us. Being in nature, hugging a tree, swatting away locusts, whatever. Yeah, well, that's a new activity. I hadn't tried that until yesterday when one almost flew in my mouth, and then he knew I was going to be speaking, so he didn't, so yeah. But it's really a time when we start to move away from all of the fear stuff. There's going to be fear. We don't have to be a part of it. And you have such a beautiful state, for one thing. I'd never been in Nashville before, and my daughter and I saw lots of beautiful parts of it yesterday, and you have a beautiful sanctuary here. And I know that CSL is a powerful organization that really lifts people, and I know that Unity is a powerful organization that lifts people. And if you had two powerful organizations together, think of what you could accomplish. I mean, I saw the light, in the sky when I was trying to find this church. I just followed that light, and here it is. It's right here. You have such an opportunity to really make a difference in the world. And I think we are also honored to have this church, this sanctuary, the music that you have, all the people that run this place. This is a beautiful place. And I'm just really honored to be here. I really am, and I hope that we can all move into these coming times, letting go of any worries about what is going to happen, because we don't know. We're moving into the unknown, and the unknown can be scary, or it can be exciting, and I'm excited. Anybody here feel excited about moving into these times? Yeah, It's going to be beautiful. So I thank you for allowing me to be here with you today. Thank Denise for welcoming us yesterday. And I'm just really thrilled of what you're doing here. And so I see the light in all of you. And together I say namaste.
Welcome to the Sunday service at CSLN. We are a welcoming and inclusive community of inspired individuals caring for and about each other and the entire planetary family. The Center for Spiritual Living Nashville offers spiritual tools for anyone seeking a more fulfilled and meaningful life through a deeper connection with a higher power or universal truths. Be sure to subscribe below if you enjoy our programs.